these were generals that did not cover themselves with glory. And in fact, they were some of the most incompetent Confederate generals, but they happened to be good in the eyes of their citizens enough to posture them as the namesakes of some of these posts.
Do you have a theory for why that might be?
I have no theory.
Okay, I've got one. Racism. I'm very upset about the Mexican flag, right? Because at these protests is the claim, because you got to represent America, but at the same time, we want to take the people that were traitors to America, put their names back on our military installations. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. Delighted to welcome back retired Lieutenant General. He's the former commanding general of the U.S. Army of Europe. It's Mark Hertling. How you doing, sir?
Hey, good, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you coming on today, kind of on short notice. I got to tell you, I was pretty shook by President Trump's speech yesterday at Fort Bragg. Obviously, there have been actual policies that I've found more appalling since he's been in, but just as a scene, it might have been the most dispiriting scene, I think, for me since the inauguration. He's speaking in front of a bunch of soldiers commemorating the 250th anniversary. I try not to do clips of him for people because everybody needs a break. They can watch him on the news if they want, but I'm more interested in the reaction than in Trump's words. So if you don't mind, I've got a little highlight, lowlight reel, if you will, from the speech I want to play and get your reaction to.
Sure.
Do the booth.
The fake news, ladies and gentlemen. Look at them all. Oh, what I have to put up with. Fake news. What I have to put up with. You think this crowd would have showed up for Biden? I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. In Los Angeles, the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent.
Yes, active duty military. They're booing the fake news. Former commander-in-chief, Gavin Newsom. What'd you make of that?
Yeah, it was, you said you were shook by it. I was too. I was also embarrassed. But I'll lead in by saying, the military, especially the Army, draws from all elements of the population. So it is not a surprise that there are some soldiers who support different parties. A lot of soldiers, maybe in this audience, appeared to have supported Trump. The backstory, though, that I'm receiving from some folks in the military, and I'm not sure any of this is true, but there was a couple of chain of command, I don't want to say orders, but they were, hey, if you support this guy and you want to stand behind him, you can do that. Just make sure that you look good, that you're in shape, you've got your beret on. And so and don't embarrass yourself. And if you're not
Too late.
and if you're not a supporter, then you don't even have to go to the speech. So this was not something that was ordered to the entire either 18th Airborne Corps or 82nd Airborne Division. But you can understand that, a lot of people jumped at the chance because a lot of young soldiers are enamored by their president, no matter what party they're in. But what really stunned me, and I think this is what stunned you, was the reaction to some of the things that were actually contrary to our Constitution, insulting the press, insulting other politicians. It became a political speech. It became a rally. It was a rally speech. It didn't become one. It probably started off as a rally. And there's a significant number of rules and regulations and policies that tell soldiers, when you're wearing the uniform, you must remain apolitical. You can't support another party in either an election or a campaign or in current political issues. So these were a bunch of young soldiers, and I scanned the audience when I was watching it, and it seemed like a bunch of very young soldiers without probably a whole lot of leadership, either sergeants or officers in the crowd with them. And they got caught up in the rally environment and almost kind of a mob-like reaction. So yeah, it was very disappointing. And what I'll tell you, Tim, is I sure would hope there's a bunch of commanders and senior leaders right now telling their soldiers, about the policies, reminding them again what they should and should not do at political rallies in terms of supporting candidates, but especially candidates that seem to run contrary to some of the things that our Constitution requires.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've been 20 before and got caught up in a mob-like environment, jeering at people that maybe I look back on and shouldn't have done, right? So I understand that. Even still, it's in the military, everybody's in uniform.
Yeah.
And like you said, hopefully there are some commanders or military leadership that would have, that maybe would provide some feedback afterwards. But are we sure that is that happening? Is there evidence of that happening? I know Tom Nichols is in the Atlantic this morning, saying folks should speak out as far as military leadership is concerned. Maybe that's too much to wish for. I don't know. But what do you think? I don't, in the conversations you have with ex-military and all that, what do you think the conversations are like?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a reaction by the military today. And I always look at it from what would I do if? When I do military analysis for different people, I try and look at the enemy's point of view, the friendly point of view, and what I would do as a commander.
Yeah.
If I had been still in command of either U.S. Army Europe, 1st Armored Division, a brigade or a squadron or even a company with 100 people in it, if I had seen that, I think the very first thing I would do at morning PT formation is go in and talk to the soldiers that I was leading and say, hey, this isn't what we are. This is not who we are proposing to be. This is not the culture of the military. We don't jeer the press. We don't, we work with the press, even though sometimes we don't like them. And they get under our craw sometimes. We work with them because, by the way, the military, the Army specifically, and the press are the two institutions that are named by name in the Constitution of the United States. So those are two things you don't counter, and you don't cheer for one political party or person over another. When people make fun of other people, I mean, one of our Army values is respect. We have respect. We should have respect for all people. And so when you're jeering the press or you're jeering Governor Newsom, as Mr. Trump called him, or anything else, that's just not appropriate in the military culture. And I think soldiers have to be reminded of that.
Yeah. Okay. I do think this will be interesting to see how that shakes out. I hope that's happening. Obviously, the worries are, at some level, the scene was like what word did you use? Embarrassing, and it felt like not particularly American, and so that is what gives you kind of a natural negative physical reaction to it. But the worry, obviously, is the kind of worst case scenario elements of all this, that folks in the military just start to get used to this, and we're about to get into LA next, but like across a series of different, in a series of different ways, they start to undermine what the kind of traditional, role had been. And you start to see the military doing more partisan stuff on behalf of an increasingly emboldened wannabe autocrat. I mean, like, that's the thing that I think worried me watching that, is like, man, I see a lot of people that I think would go along with a lot of stuff right
Yeah,
now that isn't great.
yeah, I think we see the president openly trying to create chaos in different institutions, and especially the institutions that held during his first administration: the legal system, the rule of law, the courts, the military. Those are the ones I think present the biggest potential for a crisis. And I see last night truly as kind of that opening of a door to a potential crisis, especially given the other things that are going on. The context of last night at Fort Bragg was really pretty interesting, talking about, the parade this weekend, what's going on in Los Angeles, what's potentially going on in other places, the reduction of arms to Ukraine made by, the announcement made by Secretary Hegseth. Those are the things all coming together that really show sort of an upheaval of not only our policies, but also our foreign policy.
Yeah. I want to get into all those things. One more thing from the speech. In the words of Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty, your boos mean nothing because I've seen what makes you cheer. It wasn't just what they booed that was concerning. There was some cheers following the announcement that we're going to rename the some of these military installations after, or go back to the Confederate names. I just want to play that clip really quick.
I think it took them a little by surprise, but for a little breaking news, we are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee.
Yeah. It's interesting because every one of those that he named were a Confederate general. The posts were named after. The Department of Defense, Secretary Hegseth is trying to get around that by saying, well, it's not the real Lee that we're naming it after. We're not really naming it after Robert E. Lee. We're naming it after Fitz Lee, who I think was actually a relative of Robert E. Lee, who died in another war and received an award. But,
who did the right thing.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, a lot of the relatives of Robert E. Lee who fought for the Union, by the way, I was seeing some stuff, some chatter on social media about how can you blame Robert E. Lee? We got to go back to him. He was defending his family. And it's like, no, actually, that's not true. People should listen to the Behind the Bastards about Robert E. Lee. It's a really excellent podcast. And his family was split, actually. So that's not quite right. So he did. Well, so there are some Lees that were on the Union side we could name things after,
right,
for sure.
Right. And there, the other post, A.P. Hill, Bragg. I mean, these were generals that did not cover themselves with glory. And in fact, they were some of the most incompetent Confederate generals. Not only did they, act as a traitor to the country by disavowing their oath, but they also were not all that good on the battlefield. But they happened to be good in the eyes of their citizens enough to posture them as the namesakes of some of these posts.
Do you have a theory for why that might be?
I know. I have no theory.
Okay, I've got one. Racism. They like the Confederacy. It's Confederacy nostalgia. I'm very upset about the Mexican flag, right? Because at these protests is the claim, because you got to represent America, but at the same time, we want to take the people that were traitors to America and put their names back on our military.
Well, if you don't like the Mexican flag, you probably like the Confederate flag even more, or less, or whatever. But yeah, it's nonsensical. It's just appealing to emotion. It's the proverbial red meat, and I hate to use that phrase, but it seems to override any logic or pragmatism. That when you look at the evidence, you say, "Oh, okay, that's why these posts shouldn't be named that way," or "That's why the Marines shouldn't deploy," or "That's why." Yeah, I mean, you could go down the entire list if you actually analyze it and apply facts and rationale. You'll get a whole different solution, but it doesn't seem to be that's in the equation. It's all about emotions and opinions and rabidness, I guess.
Yeah. And it's all about sticking your finger in the eye of the other guys, right? I mean, Hegseth does this, we're not going to be woke. We're not going to be politically correct. And it's about that, right? It's like, we know this will make our political enemies unhappy, that it will be a troll on them to rename these, whatever, and rename a fort after some loser traitor general. And that's why they're doing it. Okay. I want to talk about Los Angeles. So some stuff has happened since yesterday. We do now have hundreds of Marines. They're hitting the streets of LA today. We learned a little bit more about what the National Guard troops were doing. Maybe you can explain this. Adam Kinzinger texted me and said they are National Guard troops, but technically they're kind of federal troops because of the nature of how they've been brought into, service, so to speak, here in Los Angeles. But anyway, we saw the type of protection they were providing. We have reporting that they're providing like perimeter protection for ICE raids. So it's not even anti-riot. Anyway, what do you make of what we know so far about what the use of military in Southern California?
Well, I'll talk about the control of them first. I mean, any state's National Guard belongs to the governor of that state, and he or she can use the Guard in ways that contribute to law and order or security within the state, or for humanitarian crisis. That's something called Title 32. And when the president says, "Hey, I need the National Guard for something else," all during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, multiple National Guard units were mobilized under Title X and reinforced the active duty military. But that's with the coordination and the collaboration of the government of the state, particularly the governor. So the president would go to the governor and say, "Hey, look, I need, the division out of California to reinforce one of the active divisions in Iraq. Can you mobilize them under Title X, and we can federalize them and have them go just like active troops?" And they do that, and they're great. I mean, they are terrific. They normally do logistics functions, but there are some combat arms forces. Okay, so when you disregard the role of the governor in controlling his National Guard, then that's a major party foul. You should always be coordinating with the Guard for their state's militia, if you will. So that's the first thing that stuck in the craw of Governor Newsom, that he was not asked if these could be federalized. It just came as an order from the Department of Defense. So very little coordination. And what you have to consider is these Guard soldiers are not sitting around in a barrack somewhere or, in the motor pool of some tank park. They're working jobs as real estate agents and dental assistants and anything you can name, and they are pulled away from those jobs. So it's a huge disruption, not just for the individual soldier who has to then report to his unit for deployment, but it's a disruption of the workplace that they have to leave.
Yeah.
Add to that the fact that the California Guard specifically does some wonderful things, not only in firefighting and wildfires and all the things that they do, but they're also part of something called a state partnership program, which no one really knows about. So every single state has a partnership with some other country. Coincidentally, over the last 10 years, California's National Guard has had a partnership with Ukraine. So they have been inside of Ukraine multiple times with small forces, training the Ukrainian army prior to the war breaking out. I used to work with the California Guard. They're when I was in U.S. Army Europe, they're a great organization. They've got some great leaders, and the Ukrainians stand by them 100%. So you can see just by that description, the churn you're going to get of disrupting normal missions and taking people away from their jobs, and how employers feel about this. If you've got a person working for you who's a guardsman, and every couple of weeks they're saying, "Hey, I just got notified I got to go somewhere." Well, if you're an employer, you're going to lose that person for a month or 2 months. And in this case, from what I understand, the deployment order is 2 months long, 60 days, even though they haven't been really given a mission other than support for civilian authorities. And that's a very amorphous kind of mission set where you're asked to do anything you can. So that's the background.
Well, I think that's interesting context, in particular for the other element of what I brought up, right? That we're learning yesterday. It's like you're disrupting, the lives of these guardsmen. You're disrupting the businesses they work at. You're disrupting you're doing all that to what end, right? And the end here, apparently,
basically, you're taking them away from their family as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
to
a
be
lot
the
of
muscle to be the muscle for a deportation force, and that's really what this is. It'd be one thing, to say, okay, these riots are out of control and we need more manpower. Now, obviously, you would want to coordinate with the governor on that, and this has happened many times throughout history where the governor and president have coordinated on such a thing.
Right.
But that's not what and that's what they kind of said it was. But what it turns out it actually is that they're taking these guys to go to raid, businesses where they're unarmed immigrants. There are videos yesterday of ICE agents, kind of detaining unarmed immigrants, with these guardsmen kind of standing around with their weapons, just whatever, protecting the space. That feels to me to be insane.
With no coordination beforehand for things like lodging and food, and hey, that's up to the Guard, or in this case, once it transfers from the Guard to the federal authority, then they fall under an entirely different command structure. So every National Guard has the adjutant general, which is a 2-star general. And as soon as they're mobilized, that 2-star general is no longer the authority. They are put under the control of U.S. Northern Command, a federal active component organization. So there's that, whole kabuki dance. The one other thing I would say about the Guardsmen that I didn't mention, Tim, and it's important.
Yeah.
A lot of soldiers, a lot of guardsmen are single parents. So when they're deployed for 30 days or 60 days at a time, where do their kids go? When you're a guardsman, you have to have a family support plan where you say, if I am deployed, if I am activated for service, here's where my child is going to go. It's either going to go with a grandparent or your ex-wife or whatever. So even that creates a whole bunch of churn within the personal aspects of the Guard. And then, especially when they're mobilized by the feds to work against their fellow citizens, you've got the face-off of guardsmen who may or may not believe in what's going on, facing off against civilians who are in most cases, peacefully protesting. So there's more dynamics to this than I think most Americans understand.
Yeah, and to me, it also just should, like, listening to you explain all that, like, my reaction is, like, it really raises the bar for doing this, right? Like, this is not a thing to do willy-nilly because you want a Fox News segment, right? Like, there's a lot of considerations at play. There's a lot of personal considerations. There's safety considerations, right? And 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 there's no evidence at this point that this was necessary for anything other than escalating the public feud between Trump and Newsom and blue states and immigrants, right? I mean, is there any rationale for doing it the way they've done it?
That's kind of what you just described is sort of how I see it.
Yeah,
But you and I are not on the ground in California, so
sure, fair.
we're taking the word of Newsom versus Trump, Bass versus Trump. But I tend to believe the person on the ground who's seeing what's happening, especially a person that has a very large police force at their disposal. It was interesting. I heard somebody say the other day that there are, with the 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 700 Marines, there are more National Guard and Marines on the ground in California than we had at the very end of the stages in Afghanistan. It's kind of an interesting comparison. But to your point, it really gets to how do civilian leaders make decisions on using the military? It better be a considered, analyzed, pragmatic way. And the ones who finally pull that trigger of saying, let's launch this force, really have to understand the implications of launching this force to your point of it shouldn't just be something to put on Fox News because there's perceived craziness.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, you're right. We're not on the ground in LA, but they're just and there certainly are like some sophisticated rioters. And I was watching some of the news last night, and like some of these guys are, you are obviously have thought through the troublemaking that they're trying to do. Like, let's just say that. So it's not as if I mean there also are a bunch of peaceful like all this stuff is happening simultaneously, right? So it's not as if there was no public safety threat. But I just think to what you're getting at, like the thing that worries me, and I think the thing that worries a lot of people is just like, okay, well, it doesn't like the Trump administration isn't even really making the case that they needed to do this to support the public safety element of this only, right? And that like they were gonna do what was needed to work with, anybody in California that needs them, the LAPD or whatever. Like that's not the case that they're making. Like their case is that LA is out of control and that they need to go in there and they need to be part of the mass deportation efforts. That's just a very different animal, I
Well,
guess.
and again, I'm going to go back to the mission set because this is
Yeah.
important too. When the Guard is deployed, when active duty soldiers or Marines are deployed, unless the Insurrection Act has been called, there's a limit on what they can do. There's a mission set called support for civil authorities. So what the Guard does in those kind of missions is they take on the administrative functions, the logistical functions of supporting the frontline people who are doing the acts.
Right.
So as Mike Barnacle said yesterday, our shared friend, he said the one thing that the Guard or the Marines can't do is say, you're under arrest. They're not authorized to do that. They can't touch people unless they're threatened. So when you're talking about what cards can do, the Guard can do, they can put up barricades, they can put up fences, they can, stand around buildings to protect them. And in fact, the new mission set that you're talking about is standing around or forming a cordon around ICE. They
Yeah.
can actually do that too.
Right.
But it puts them in a position that they could be attacked by these protesters, and then they have to use force to extricate themselves. But they can't arrest the people that are using force or that are protesting.
Yeah. I think there was a letter DHS was trying to ask Higgs for permission to let them do that or whatever, which again takes you to a very concerning place.
Well, that's where the whole posse comitatus, which few people understand, comes into play, because they
Why don't you
cannot.
explain it for folks? Yeah.
Well, it's a Latin term saying for the county, and it basically says that military forces, unless it's an emergency or an insurrection, cannot use do not have the power to police, to do the acts of police people. And there's a very good reason for that. There's many good reasons for it. The one is you're approaching fellow citizens and arresting them when you're supposed to be defending them as the military. The
Right.
second thing is most of these guardsmen on the street have not been trained in police action. Unless you've got a military police battalion out on the street, they're not going to know how to handcuff people. They're not going to know how to treat people. They're not going to know how to read rights or any of those other kind of things that policemen do. They're infantry guys, or in some cases, cooks and bottle washers. That's the scary part of it.
Y'all looking for some normcore summer basics that feel good and look good? I'd recommend going back to Quince, just like I've been. Quince has all the things you actually want to wear this summer. Organic cotton silk polos, European linen beach shorts, and comfortable pants that work for everything from backyard hangs to nice dinners. The best part? Everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the markups. I've been very pleased with the Quince orders we've been getting. I got some new shorts. Needed some short shorts. It's tough out there, I got to tell you. For us short wearers, the short shorts are out. We were shopping in Nashville, and I was complaining to the person at the hipster store that all the shorts were long, and he was like, "Yeah, the guys nobody buys short shorts anymore. Back in the day, the gays bought short shorts." And there's a little kind of a Southern frat bro short energy as well. But these days, no. The youngs, the hipsters, the straights, everybody wants long shorts. So, that's tough. But Quince had some 5-inch inseamers. So I got that. Got my little army green shacket I've been wearing. A lot of Quince gear I like. You should check it out as well. Stick to the staples that last with elevated essentials from Quince. Go to quince.com/thebulwark for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thebulwark to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thebulwark. One more thing is on the folks on the ground there in LA, because there is some dialogue about this going on. I saw a video of she was dressed like an active duty troop. I guess I didn't check. She was in fatigues, talking about how her fellow soldiers should not obey unconstitutional orders, and that do any sort of the things that you're talking about, things that violate posse comitatus, things that violate the constitutional rights of Americans. When it comes to these immigration raids, they should not be a part of. Michael Wood, who we've had on here a few times, who's a veteran and who ran for Congress, posted, "Marine soldiers, sailors, airmen, you're not some sort of Republican Guard. Your loyalty is to the Constitution above all else." But on the other hand, I noticed you posted a guy named Joseph Collins saying that he's concerned about the well-meaning people telling these corporals and privates not to obey an unlawful order. It's more complex than it seems. So why don't you kind of just talk about that choice that I don't think I don't know if we've crossed the Rubicon to that yet, but man, we're a lot closer than we've been in a while.
We are close, and I saw that clip too, or that tweet or whatever it was, and it was a very good point, because there's an expression in the military called a barracks lawyer. That's someone that lives in the barracks and makes decisions on what's right and wrong and what's legal and not. And normally most soldiers don't have law degrees, so they can't really tell. But within units, there are lawyers that advise commanders that say, here's what's legal and here's what's not. Okay, here's the order I just got. What do you think? Well, that's an illegal order. You should protest it with your superior. Individual soldiers should not do that because they really don't know what is a legal or illegal order is. But if they have questions about it, they should ask their commander and their chain of command. And even that gets a little tenuous as well.
Yeah. I guess what is like the chatter for you among, fellow retireds? Like, how worried is everybody about this? Like, what is the state of alarm about kind of the use of military domestically at this point?
Well, the chatter among the proverbial generals and admirals is, it's a continuous debate on civil military relations. What do we do? What do we have the authority to do other than what we're doing right now, talking about the facts associated with the issues? What we can't say is we need to go arrest Trump. That's ridiculous. I mean,
I can do that.
Yeah, you could do that, but as a guy who represents the defense of America, I can't. What I can point out are things that are happening within our republic that says these don't seem to fit into our Constitution. And boy, you should remember that the next time you vote. But as long as you voted, the American public have given this guy the plurality of the vote, the military is beholden to obey his legal orders, number one. But then there's beyond the military debate going on, Tim, and this is the interesting thing. I can't tell you the number of texts or tweets or blue skies that I get on a daily basis saying, why aren't you guys doing something about this? And the question is, what exactly do you want us to do? You're the one that elected them. I'm sorry, and I think somebody said this after the last election, the generals aren't going to save you. That's not what we do. We defend the country. So if you want a different leader, it's up to you to determine how to get that leader. And usually it's associated with voting.
Yeah. And some of that is just the gasp of frustration of people, like who is going to be out there. And I get that. And part of it is, I don't know. Again, I think we're closer to this than we've been. I don't know. I certainly maybe back to the civil rights era, maybe more. Where like these questions become real, which is like, what is my duty? Right? Is my duty to just follow orders blindly? Is my duty to the Constitution? If I'm going to be ordered to do something that is illegal or that targets my fellow citizens, how do I process that? I don't know. If somebody called you and was just like, "What advice do you have for me on this?" I'm in a pickle. Like, what is the answer right now?
What
seems
I would tell you is I'm in that same kind of squishy ground because I was thinking about it the other day. During my 38-year military career, I worked for I worked under 5 Democratic presidents, and I think it was either 5 or 4 Democratic presidents and 6 Republican presidents. And I never had these kind of thoughts before.
Right.
That's the problem. And even in Tom Nichols' column you mentioned the other day, he said Randy George, the chief of staff of the Army, should go in and whisper in the president's ear and say, you got to quit using troops as your political props. That's easier written in the Atlantic than it is done by the chief of the Army, especially with this president. That's the hard part. How do you get this guy to back off? And how do you get Hegseth to back off from the kinds of things that they're doing? And I don't know the answer to that.
I think the last thing we kind of talked about the military parade, which is coming up this weekend. So I don't know how much more you have to say about that. One thing that happened yesterday was Trump said that anybody who protests the military parade, quote, hate our country and will be met with very heavy force. And that's alarming as well. I don't know. It could just be Trump bluster. But again, this is the type of thing that's like, we are really on a precipice here. And so I don't know. I'm wondering if you've kind of updated your thoughts on what we're going to see Saturday since we last spoke.
Yeah, I said to some folks yesterday that I'm all for celebrating the soldiers who have served in the Army or are currently serving in the Army for 250 years. It's a great milestone. The Army was founded, was created, and its birthday is a year older than our country. So that's a pretty big deal. I've never, other than required parades like for changes of command or Memorial Day parades where you go down the street, you honor different people. I've never been, truthfully, a big parade guy. Even at West Point, I tried to avoid as many parades as I could as a athlete. But what if you do have a parade, it should be honoring the soldiers that served on their birthday or that are currently serving. Part of the parade is doing that. But what we're seeing is it's turning into somewhat of a vanity play for one individual. And they're making no bones about that. That's the sad thing about it. And when I say they, it's primarily the people in the White House and the Defense Department. So I think what was initially planned as a celebration of soldiers and the anniversary of the Army has turned into something else. And with the remarks from yesterday about, very big actions against protesters, I mean, that's part of the Constitution too. That's part of the First Amendment rights to protest, the right to protest and to speak freely. So again, there's a contrary action being associated with a celebration. If somebody wants to get out and stand along the side of the road that they're marching down and say we protest with signs, I'm okay with that. The same thing as the president said last night in front of the troops that they cheered about people kneeling at football games when the Star Spangled Banner's played. I'm okay with that too, to be honest with you. I don't like it, but I'm okay with it because that's what we protect. We protect freedom of speech and expression. So there's that conversation that I think is being overwhelmed by some of the bluster. And that's what concerns me.
Sort of finer point out, it really is kind of wrapping in the American flag a lot of really anti-American sentiments, and a lot of quasi-authoritarian sentiments when it comes to breaking down protesters, very partisan speeches in front of the military, going out right, anti-immigrant, like all of this stuff is this kind of jingoism without the underlying elements of what makes America special, and that is, I don't know, that's something that really I find dangerous.
Well, I think we've talked about this once before, but it gets back to American values. And you have a lot of people say they are, that I'm all for American values. Okay, really, what are those values? What are they? Well, it's freedom of expression, freedom of speech, respect for other individuals, liberty, life, and you go down of all the
pluralism.
Yeah, you go down the speeches of people like King and Kennedy and Roosevelt, and you see what Americans' values are, and there's oftentimes we're running contrary to what those American values are, especially respect for one another and freedom of speech and freedom of religion, freedom from want. Those are the kind of things that have been outlined for us as part of our history, and yet they're being ignored by just the simple statement of, well, I'm all for American values. Okay, well, what are they? And are you really living by them? So there's a little bit of hypocrisy there.
Two more just topics really quick. I guess related to Trump, but not as directly. I had some friends sending me videos from Ukraine over the last few days. There have been massive aerial attacks from Russia on Kharkiv, on Kyiv. It's a little bit out of the news because of all the other stuff that is happening. But that offensive coming off of this period of Trump talking to Putin for an hour and a half and saying that these are just like two guys fighting on the playground. You got to let them fight it out. I mean, it seems like to me, again, as an outsider, that we're in an escalating period from Russia in response to the president's cowering. But I don't know what you make of what you're seeing out of Ukraine and what you're hearing from folks.
It's interesting. I think the Russians continue to do what they've been doing for 3 years, but at a much greater rate. They launched over 450 missiles and drones over the last couple of nights, each night, against civilian targets, specifically civilian targets. So they're hitting infrastructure, apartment buildings, hospitals, schools, churches. And this is in direct reaction to Ukraine's action in the spider web operation that specifically targeted military aircraft and military facilities. So you've got one side going after the military and the other side continuing to try and affect the will of the Ukrainian people by killing civilians, contrary to the law, international law, and the law of land warfare. And it is Putin, I think, trying to gain an advantage of imparting his will against the people more massively than he has over the last couple of years. And it's because we are ignoring it. I think that's one of the reasons why Putin invaded in the first place, because he saw a divided America and a divided NATO. Well, NATO has come together. America sort of came together for a while, and now it's separating apart. So he's using that obfuscation as a way to continue with his desires to occupy part or all of Ukraine, which is troubling.
Yeah. Kyiv Pride is this weekend, so I'd request that folks stay safe in that. That feels like a lot of dangerous targets these days. If you're in Ukraine, do you have any? I think I asked you this last time, but we've got 3 months. Things are changing so quickly. We've seen what happened with the offensive from Ukraine. Do you sense that without America, this is a doable fight for Ukraine with Europeans behind them? How do you assess their capabilities without us?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I was in Sweden 2 weeks ago talking to their defense college, defense university, and there seems to be, my take is there's an uptick on what the Europeans are trying to do to compensate for the loss of at least some of American support. But at the same time, I also see Ukraine masterfully building drone factories and ammunition factories and trying to keep up. But the biggest problem is they don't have the air defense capability that they need. And there's only a few people, us included, that can provide some of that.
Who else can?
That's what Secretary Hegseth evidently eliminated as of today.
Eliminated the air defense help.
Yeah, the contributions of weapon systems to Ukraine. Not sure, that may be just, internet rumor, but allegedly that's what he said he was going to do. And he said it in the speech last night at Fort Bragg.
Yeah. Speaking of internet rumor, I've also have on decent authority that this is not going to be surprising that they're going to revoke. I don't have the official name in front of me, but whatever the version of TPS was for Ukraine, temporary protected status for Ukrainians who came to America. It isn't TPS; it was a different program, but it sounds a lot of discussion in immigration circles that they're planning on revoking that.
Well, that goes in line with the revoking of the Afghan special visa holders as well.
Is there outrage about that in your circles? The Afghan special visa revocation.
There is, because I think a lot of the military folks who served in Afghanistan understand what it's going to do. It's going to send people back to Afghanistan who were contributing to our fight as interpreters or assisters in units. So there's outrage in the military community, but it's underneath the wave tops of all the other crap that's going on.
Okay, last thing, I couldn't not ask you about Tulsi, our director of national intelligence, while I had you. 2 news items in the last 48 hours. Apparently, she fed the JFK files into an AI to see what she thought should be declassified. She said that in a speech at some corporate function. She also put out this creepy video about how we're the closest we've ever been to nuclear annihilation, which to me read as either, kind of some sort of Russian propaganda type message that, like, hey, we should back out of Ukraine. We don't want to escalate towards nuclear war, or maybe kind of a Golden Dome type. I was trying to understand what was behind this, like, very weird video. Me and Sam Stein did a big breakdown of it, where she was warning that we're close to nuclear annihilation. Well, I open-ended on what you've seen from our director of national intelligence.
The latter one on the nuclear weapons is that seems to be a messaging of a Russian talking point, multiple talking points that they've made about using nuclear weapons, and it continues to be a debate within the Russian government. The first one about the AI, I heard that this morning, and it's just mind-boggling to me that unless it's a secure AI capability, she's given up secrets. I mean, I can, insert things in Chat GPT and say, consolidate all my writings into this thing and give me a summary of all this, which is, if what she did was on an open source AI platform,
had to be.
she's just provided it to the entire world. So
What the director of national intelligence, like, also that job, she's so upfront, like that. It should be a secret. It should be a behind the scenes job, right? I mean, talk to me about that a little bit. You're in the military. Do you want the director of national
no,
intelligence out there
you,
doing
you
all
know,
this stuff?
and I was in the Pentagon as the J7 when the DNI was first created under Rumsfeld. And it's interesting because that was supposed to be the
Negroponte was
coordinator.
the first one.
Wasn't it Cambone? I'm not sure. I don't remember. But the thing was created, and it was supposed to be the coordinator of all the intelligence agencies. Well, you would think that person would be in a trench somewhere and no one would ever know. The very fact that we don't even know who it was, and I don't even know who the last couple of ones were, tells you that they're never seen. But I'm seeing Gabbard all over the news recently, with performative politics and what she thinks should be happening. And it's not collaboration of intelligence, it's just her own personal beliefs.
All right. Anything I didn't ask you for? Any wisdom you want to leave us with? It was a pretty bleak podcast today, Generals. You got any
Really well. The one thing that I've kind of been hot on that I don't think has garnered attention because it's so buried, and that's the deletion of CISA, the cyber network folks that are doing a great job in keeping us safe. I think that it's not a military operation, but it certainly is connected to the military. And I think we've said that cyber warfare is a potential national threat for the last 20 years. And now we've completely disbanded the agency that is supposed to be protecting us. So I think that's troublesome and should garner more attention.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think that all, like, again, it's hard to do. You're doing Kremlinology now with the administration sometimes, but it could be just directly related to the 2020 stuff. Chris Krebs was the person that was the point man on that spoke,
Right.
that they were protecting our elections from cyber attacks. They do other, protection of us from cyber attacks, but that was one thing they were doing that he was the point person on, and Trump got obviously mad at him for telling the truth about the election and is targeting him. And who the hell knows with Trump? It might just be that, like, now that word CISA he doesn't like anymore because they were the people that were saying the election was not stolen in 2020.
Right. The cleanest election we've ever had. And so let's disband the people that helped make it that way. Yeah. So that's one area. But Tim, there's so many others. We could go on and on, but it's kind of an interesting national security environment, isn't it?
Not an uplifting close, but okay. That's okay. That's just the world we're in. Mark Hertling, please come back. We're gonna obviously have a lot of developments, unfortunately, domestically and abroad related to the military. And so we appreciate your expertise and wisdom on all this.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody else, we'll be back here tomorrow with another edition of the Bulwark Podcast. See you all then. Peace.